Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Grayzone. We got a lot to talk about today. It's been a while. Been on a little hiatus, out doing some traveling. I spoke at the memorial for Michael Parenti in Berkeley, California last week, and it was good to get out on the West Coast. Reminded me how much the Washington, D.C. area sucks. And back in studio now, and someone else has been on the road. Our close colleague and friend Wyatt Reed has been all across Iran after the 39-day Ramadan war and before the next phase, which is just heating up right now as Trump announces Project Freedom, a humanitarian project to provoke another war. So we're going to bring Wyatt in right now to discuss what he saw on the ground inside Iran. Wyatt, you're sideways, and welcome to the Grayzone. And now, there you go. Some interesting angles on Wyatt's hotel room. You're kind of Turkish passing. Are you in Istanbul?
I am in Istanbul, and I've been Turkified by a barber just about an hour ago. So
It's good. I like that he seems to have done your brows, which is good.
he did actually. That was the first time I've ever experienced that. When in Istanbul.
In the Ben Shapiro decline of Ben Shapiro, I now get my eyebrows done because his grow each time he lies, which is maybe why he's lost 80% of his audience and ours keeps growing. It's like an inverse effect.
As his eyebrows shorten, our audience grows.
Something like that. Anyway, how long were you in Iran for?
Close to 2 weeks. I flew in at the end of I guess around April 21st. It took me a while. I had to go from DC to Istanbul, from Istanbul to Van, and then from Van I had to drive to the border because Iran's airports have been closed and just now opened up a few days ago. So I had to make the land journey from Van to the border of Iran, and then from there to Iran itself, and then went to Tabriz and to Tehran. So it took a while. It was almost a 3-day journey.
Yeah, Israel bombed the Mehrabad airport repeatedly, bombing civilian airliners, and it obviously wasn't safe to fly in. How, under what circumstances did you enter Iran?
Across the land border.
But I mean, who brought you, who hosted you, and what was your agenda?
There's a group named Saab that organizes
I think it's
a
pronounced Sob.
yeah Soab that organizes a sort of a documentary fest, a media festival once a year. This year, instead of doing that, it's been postponed. They organized a small group for independent journalists to come in and sort of see the reality themselves.
Yeah.
It's a great way to see firsthand what's happening. And obviously, access to Iran is pretty tight right now due to the wartime conditions. So I feel very blessed to have been able to be one of the handful of people who actually gets to see what's happening firsthand, because it's obviously media is has its own set of difficulties. CNN was able to get a reporter in briefly, but I don't think they were able to see much of the country beyond Tehran. So I was able to see not just Tehran, but to go to Tabriz, like I mentioned, to Isfahan, to Bandar Abbas, to the Strait of Hormuz, to Minab, the site of this horrible, horrible crime against humanity by the U.S. military, back to Tehran, and then fly out. Be one of the first people who saw these airports back in use again.
Well, you got right into the mix right after entering into Tabriz. You attended one of the patriotic pro-government rallies that have been ongoing since the unprovoked assault on Iran began on February 28th. Here's what you saw.
The Iranian city, and I am surrounded by hundreds, if not thousands, of Iranians who are gathered here to celebrate their country, to celebrate its resistance to what they view as a U.S.-Israeli war of aggression. It's people of all ages, all backgrounds, all of the kids, all of the women, all of the men. They're all describing that they're incredibly proud of what their country is doing. And if this ceasefire does end tonight, that they will be willing to stand by their government.
So what were your impressions there? I mean, there are massive rallies in Tehran at Engelab Square, and it looks like they brought out, as they do in Tehran, they brought out a ballistic missile launcher, which was kind of a new effect.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible not to be kind of impressed by these rallies, which, as has been relayed to me, were really kind of these grassroots expressions of support for their government. I'm not sure why this keeps happening. I am going to just leave it straight up if that happens again. But but yeah, it's impressive, right? It's the first impression is that just there's this huge crowd of people. They're all very much in support of their government. In some cases, they kind of serve as kind of a hard line that gives the government leverage to continue to maintain a firm stance against the U.S. and against Israel, because you have this huge show of people in the streets that are not really pleased with the idea of negotiating with the U.S. If you were an Iranian negotiator and you're dealing with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, and they say, well, we want you to compromise on these particular issues, you can say with full sincerity, well, our people won't go for that because there are tens of thousands of people in the streets. Yeah, I guess we cannot go sideways on my phone, so I'm just going to keep this straight up. Every time we get a comment, it seems like it's switching to just wants to be sitting straight. Yeah. So that, it serves as kind of a check on the ability of the Iranian leadership to capitulate. You have a very clear, massive group of Iranians who don't necessarily want their government to be negotiating, don't want to negotiate away any kind of uranium enrichment. And in addition, something that is also very clear is that while these rallies, which originated, obviously the government is working with them, and they're bringing in, as you mentioned, air defense and kind of military hardware to show off and for people to pose and take pictures with. But they originated just kind of grassroots, organically, people wanting to do something to show their support for their government during this war that was imposed on them. And they also, in that way, they serve as a kind of check against the foreign riots, the foreign-backed riots that plagued the country for a couple days in particular, but for several weeks at the beginning of the year. The Mossad-backed actors that would like more than anything else to destabilize the country through a series of violent protests and riots, they can't do that if every major city square in the country is being occupied by patriotic Iranians who are showing their support for their government. So as long as these rallies continue, and they've continued for over 60 days already, it's impossible for the Mossad-backed actors to really act against the government and to generate any kind of unrest.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it highlights one of the key failures that Israeli media has now been acknowledging. Ynet has a major feature we might discuss later about how the Mossad actually has taken credit again for those riots that we saw on January 8th and 9th inside Iran, and that they thought that this war would generate more, and that along with pressure from the outside brought on by Kurdish proxies that they would destabilize Iran, and that project has completely failed. And you showed that failure with with your attendance at that patriotic rally. We also saw human chains formed around Iranian power plants and other key pieces of infrastructure. This is, one of the most, honestly, from my point of view, one of the most inspiring anti-imperialist protests, people just defending their public assets against a project of state destruction by the US and Israel. You also documented a lot of US-Israeli crimes, including one of the most revealing Israeli crimes, the most revealing Israeli crime, in my opinion, which was the Israeli total destruction of the Rafinia synagogue in Tehran, one of the major active synagogues in Tehran, which I didn't actually visit it, but I walked by it on my way to interview Hamayun Samea, who is the Jewish member of parliament in Iran's Majlis. Let's take a look at your report.
Most people have no idea that there are synagogues in Iran. But you know who does? Israel. That's who carried out the missile attack that leveled the synagogue behind me just a couple of weeks ago. During Passover, in fact, as you can see, the entire synagogue was completely leveled. Israel blamed it on quote-unquote collateral damage. But Israel actually has a long history of carrying out attacks on synagogues itself. In the early 1950s, they targeted a number of synagogues in Iraq as part of a operation by Israeli intelligence meant to coerce the local Jewish population into moving to Israel. And it succeeded beyond their wildest imaginations. Over 90% of the local Jewish population decided to move. Perhaps that is exactly what's at play today with the Israeli government's decision to carry out these strikes here. Iran, to this day, has the second largest Jewish population in the Middle East after Israel. There's very little doubt that Israel would like for that to change. Most people.
So you're you're suggesting that Israel did this deliberately in order to compel the total exodus of the Jewish population of Iran. That would be my takeaway as well, just given the history in Israel. But did you talk to any Iranians who also saw it that way?
I think most Iranians are familiar with Israel's tactics, see it that way. I was able to visit a synagogue myself, and as you did, see that Iranians who are Jewish are able to participate in their spiritual life freely and without any kind of coercion. That it continues to endure during wartime. So I mean, you could probably speak a little better to this, just the sort of state of Jewish life in Iran. But my impression, having visited another synagogue in Tehran, was that despite the Israeli attacks on this Jewish center of life, that for most Jews in Iran, life goes on. They are unbowed. They are continuing to go about their lives, and they're continuing to worship in freedom, much to the apparent chagrin of the Israeli government. So, not having delved terribly deeply and not having worshipped alongside them as you did, but just interacting with them, it seemed that things were kind of normal there, and as normal as they can be in wartime. And I was impressed by that, not having seen that before. It's surprising. It is surprising, even if you know that it exists. It is surprising to go into a synagogue and see kind of all of the staples of Jewish worship being enacted there, and the reading of Torah scrolls, something that is kind of a sacred moment being shared with us. It was impressive.
Yeah, I mean, what you're documenting there is the Zionist war on Judaism across the Muslim world, or the Muslim majority world, the religious war that Israel's waging. And Zionism has a long history of attacks on Jews. I don't think that's well known. We're going to talk later about this freak out in the UK over a mentally disturbed man who stabbed 2 Jews, but also stabbed his Muslim roommate. And no one mentions that he stabbed his Muslim roommate in London. And this has caused just like a national meltdown. They're making new laws under Keir Starmer to shut down, to criminalize phrases like globalize the intifada. I don't know if like me saying that will cause the stream to be demonetized or banned in the UK. But there was hardly any coverage in the West of the bombing of the Rafinia synagogue. And very few people in the West know about the long history of Zionist attacks on Jews. The worst attack, no one knows about the worst attack, or one of the worst attacks, the bombing of the Patriotic in Haifa port. In the port of Haifa in 1940, the Zionist Haganah, which became the IDF, bombed a ship filled with 1,500 Jewish refugees from World War II Europe who were trying to avoid extermination, and killed 250 of them. And they blamed it on the British in order to try to compel the British to lift their white paper policy of limiting Jewish immigration, because it was colonization that was causing conflict in Mandate Palestine, because they were seeking to push out the indigenous Palestinian population. And the crime was exposed as a Haganah operation, a false flag, which they attempted to blame on the British to change British policy. 250 Jews were killed, and they're all listed. If you go on like the Holocaust Memorial Museum's website, they're listed as victims of the Holocaust. Pretty amazing. So that, I thought that was a really significant report. And the fact that you brought in the bombings of Jewish targets in Baghdad by the same Zionist underground, same Zionist movement. Actually, it was Israel at that point. And
this comes as the sort of pre-Israel formations, not just the Haganah, but Irgun, all of these sort of terrorist Jewish groups were attacking not just Jewish locations, but British civilian and government installations. Operation Susanna, in not just in Iraq, but in Egypt. They were targeting American institutions and installations. They targeted basically everyone who they perceived as preventing the formation of a Zionist state. And they were rewarded for these vile terrorist attacks with Israel, with the creation of a nation of Zionists. And instead of being punished, they went on to become the prime ministers and leaders of this terrorist state.
It's a great point. You know, the bombing of the King David Hotel, another deadly terrorist attack on the Brits. You think Keir Starmer is operating from a place of enthusiasm as he cowers before the Zionist movement and Israel right now? No, he's operating from a place of fear, with the King David bombing hovering in the background. Let's go to your most viral report, which contained the least amount of context, but it's just a minute of sheer drama. This is you at the scene of the Battle of Isfahan, where I think 8 U.S. aircraft, very costly aircraft, were destroyed as the U.S. attempted to rescue a downed airman from an F-15E that had been taken down by Iranian air defenses. We still don't know who that airman is, by the way. It's a high-ranking, I think like
supposedly a colonel.
A colonel, yeah, that's pretty high-ranking.
And bizarre, why is this colonel flying around, instead of back at the base or ordering other people to do it?
Exactly. And he was supposedly the weapons specialist. The whole thing is weird. Well, let's watch your report and get your take.
We're here in the outskirts of Isfahan, in the site of the most famous battle of the entire U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. Around me are the remnants of the U.S. warplanes, which came, according to the United States, to rescue pilots According to the Iranians, that's not why they were here. They say they were here to steal the enriched uranium, to seize it and prevent Iran from ever pursuing nuclear power or any type of nuclear program. But as you can see, the American warplanes which came here never left. They came to Isfahan, and in Isfahan, they will stay.
So what was going on there? There was a sort of a patriotic rally that you happened upon. What was it like? Set the scene for us.
Well, we were brought in, I think, the first foreign journalists to be able to inspect the site of this battle, what seemed to be a battle between the American military forces, which were ostensibly brought in to rescue this downed airman, but which Iranians insist was actually sort of a forward operating base established in order to seize the uranium in Isfahan. And frankly, just given the amount and the range, the kind of distance between the charred ground, the areas of the ground, the craters across the ground, it seemed far less likely that these were simply, as the U.S. side claims, were sort of simply disposed of on their way out of the country in order to prevent the Iranians from getting their hands on them. It looked much more like there had like a serious battle had taken place there to me. So I was able to take footage up close of the charred remains of several of these aircraft. I'm not enough of a military expert to have been able to identify the different parts of the wreckage, but I did come across a metal plate bearing the name Lockheed Martin on it, attached to one of these. It was very clear these are indeed American aircraft that were destroyed. I believe they may have been the MC-130s that were supposedly brought in to, for some reason, enable a rescue mission, which again is just a very strange aircraft to use. Why would you need a huge cargo plane
Right.
in order to rescue a handful of airmen? Why wouldn't you use a helicopter, something that would be much easier to get in and out, something that would make much less noise, have much less of a heat signature, be far less easy to spot from a radar perspective or simply to the naked eye? Another one of these strange points that has never really been totally explained. And, while we're at it, it's been 60 days. This is the least popular war in modern American history. Why on earth, if we had conducted this amazing Black Hawk Down, style movie cinematic rescue, why on earth are the airmen not being named? Why aren't they being paraded around Times Square? Why aren't we having huge rallies in their honor saying, wow, look at these wonderful guys and look, here are the heroes who brought them home? Why are they anonymous still? It's just none of it really adds up. So that, to me, just on the basis of the kind of circumstantial evidence, which I think is probably the only thing we're going to have, at least for the next few years, pointed far more in the direction of the Iranian narrative than it did in the U.S.
And going back to why was a colonel among the two airmen who were downed, someone so high ranking who was a weapons specialist who clearly has some advanced skill set.
Yeah, we're not the Israeli military. Colonels are real officers in the Air Force.
Exactly. In Israel, everyone gets to be an officer. There were ID cards found of nuclear specialists as well who had assignments in Israel.
Well, and there are other strange. Why was somebody carrying around a passport? There was a passport located. Why would they be carrying around a passport if they
Yes.
were operating on a rescue mission? Military, soldiers, airmen, naval officers, none of them carry around identifying documents. They have dog tags. That's what they have. Dog tags wrapped around their necks. That's how they identify themselves when they're going on missions. Nobody carries around a passport for a standard combat operation.
It does seem to me like there's a cover up at play and there's more reporting to be done. on the Battle of Isfahan. It just doesn't add up. And I have to assume that both of the airmen who were rescued were severely injured, which might be one reason why we're not hearing from them or seeing them. But they should be speaking about what the mission is. Reporters should be asking these questions.
If they indeed do exist, yes.
If they exist. The whole thing is utterly bizarre. Do they even exist?
Right.
So from there, you took a train to Bandar Abbas, is that right?
Yes. From Isfahan, I went to Bandar Abbas via an overnight train.
So we had Ahmed Sadaldin, who was down there, who was first in Iran with Dmitry Lascaris. We had them both on, and they talked about their train ride to Bandar Abbas. Definitely puts Amtrak to shame. Also, the Iranian National Train Line did not have Hunter Biden on its board of directors. What was that train ride like?
It was once in a lifetime. It was an incredible way to see the country, to meet people. At that point, my video from Isfahan had gone kind of viral on Iranian media. So several of the conductors on the train recognized me and wanted to take selfies with me, which was kind of fun. The food was great. They were constantly serving very nice tea. The scenery was absolutely incredible. We went through a dust storm at some point, and had the windows open. So my laptop probably needs a more thorough cleaning than I've been able to give it. But that was just is something like out of a movie to me. Just we're going through a dust storm in a train in Iran and going to Bandar Abbas, headed to the Strait of Hormuz. It was kind of an interesting and fun situation, and I definitely will never forget it. The train itself, I think a ticket cost about $10, which for me as a semi-regular Amtrak customer is the cheapest I've ever paid for any train ticket in my life. Let alone one that included food and beverages and overnight and bedding, et cetera, et cetera. So I was very positively impressed by how they've been able to maintain the rail system under sanctions, under wartime conditions, and kind of create a very pleasant experience as a passenger.
Unfortunately, you couldn't play cards around an old barrel with a bottle of whiskey. However, it sounds like an incredible experience that wound you up in the Strait of Hormuz the following day. And so you were, I think, the second American reporter to be able to get to the Strait of Hormuz. This is your report.
I'm here reporting from the Strait of Hormuz, where the naval standoff between Iran and the U.S. continues 2 months to the day after the U.S. and Israel launched a sneak attack on Iran mid-negotiations. Now, on Sunday, CENTCOM announced that it had intercepted another Iranian vessel as it attempted to transit the strait, bringing the total number of vessels intercepted by the U.S. to 38 now. Last week, when the U.S. attorney Jeanine Pirro boasted that the U.S. government had taken 2 Iranian oil tankers by force, they said they did so on the basis of so-called seizure warrants, based on their own unilateral and internationally unrecognized sanctions regime. A spokesman for Iran's foreign ministry says the move by the U.S. represents, quote, the outright legalization of piracy and armed robbery on the high seas, and he warned it would lead to, quote, the return of pirates. Only now, he said, they operate with government-issued warrants. And
so, yeah, it's a slightly longer report. I forgot Jeanine Pirro was the U.S. attorney. That's pretty. Speaking of like a pirate ship, that's what the Trump administration is. But what kind of insight did you get there in the Strait of Hormuz, just seeing the physical landscape and the discussions you had. You spoke to the governor of Bandar Abbas. You had an in-depth interview down there. What kind of insights did you get heading into what Trump calls Project Freedom, this announcement of the U.S. Navy escorting ships through the strait, but not actually escorting them? There have been reports since our conversation began of Iranian strikes on Emirati oil facilities. So it looks like the conflict is reigniting thanks to Trump's show of force. Iran is redirecting shipping towards Dubai. In other words, ordering tankers to head towards the Emirates and away from the Strait of Hormuz. But what kind of insights did you gather down there?
Well, first of all, Iran has a huge fleet of various types of tankers, cargo ships, vessels. There were dozens and dozens and dozens of ships just kind of parked, waiting for things to cool off. And given that they are in Bandar Abbas, most of them are Iranian flagged, or outside of Bandar Abbas, I should say. Most of them are Iranian flagged. Most of them are attempting to trade goods on behalf of Iranian consumers. Other insights, it's very, very narrow. It's very quick. It takes only a handful of minutes. I think really, you could cross it in less than an hour if you were on a quick enough boat, and you can see the other side. You can see straight through to Oman pretty quickly after you leave the shore of Bandar Abbas. So it just kind of reminds you how difficult it would be for vessels trying to operate under this so-called Operation Freedom to successfully transit. There's nowhere there to hide. It's also relatively shallow. We saw a shipwreck, of one of the ships that had been taken out by the Iranian side for refusing their orders.
Yeah.
And you can see parts of the ship above water. It's again, it's a very narrow, very shallow strait. So the idea that they're going to sneak ships through there is just kind of farcical to me. It's not a body of water that's conducive to any kind of subversive sort of activities there. So that was my main takeaway, is just this is not going to be a challenge for the Iranians to control. The Navy can make its way back and forth very quickly. They could mine it very effectively. They could do all sorts of things. They could send underwater drones. They could send fast boats in a matter of minutes to intercept any boats that they saw going through there, and it's not hard to track them either. So again, that with that in mind, I would say the claim today by CENTCOM that 2 ships had been guided through by the U.S. military, that 2 U.S. flagged ships have been guided through. I would say the same thing I said about these airmen. Show them to us. What were their names? Who are they? How did they do this? Show us a picture. Prove to us that this did indeed happen. Show us a path of a transponder. None of that has been forthcoming, and I don't think it will be.
No, it won't. And this was yesterday. I mean, here's a ship being taken out, another tanker burning. This was immediately after Trump announced Project Freedom on Sunday because the markets were going to open and he wanted to lower the price of Brent crude. And now oil is back up again well over 100 a barrel. He lowered it momentarily. And, there's a stock market wipeout. And then here's, this is the dump, the Trump administration. This is like their receptacle. Barack Reed, former Israeli reservist. Steve Witkoff, just has this guy on the phone all the time. I don't know if he has time to eat cereal for breakfast when Steve Witkoff is constantly leaking to him. The new Hormuz initiative will not necessarily include U.S. Navy ships, according to 2 U.S. officials. Maybe he got Kushner on the line too. One of the officials said U.S. Navy ships will be in the vicinity in case they need to prevent Iran's military from attacking commercial ships moving through the strait. Well, it looks like they didn't prevent that attack. The official said the U.S. Navy is going to provide commercial ships with information on the best maritime lanes in the strait, especially when it comes to using lanes that were not mined by the Iranian military. So basically the U.S. CENTCOM exists to provide advice on where the mines are, but there have been reports that Iran has even lost track of some of its mines. Do you think if you were, I don't know, the captain of a tanker, that you would just trust the U.S. military? Oh, they said the mines are over there. Here's the safe lane through this very narrow strait, like 23 kilometers across. I'm going to take my chances. And by the way, all Iran has is mines. It doesn't have fast boats. It doesn't have anti-ship missiles. I'll just ignore the incoming missile fire. Sounds like a plan.
Very
yeah.
questionable idea. And apparently these captains need to check not the CENTCOM page, but check the Talking Israeli Parrot page, Barack Ravid's Twitter profile, because I guess he's a more reliable barometer for what's actually happening in the White House than CENTCOM itself. No, it's absurd. The idea that any rational human being, let alone the captain of a ship, would intentionally plunge themselves through this gauntlet is ridiculous. And I think it was actually, if I'm not mistaken, there's a quote in this Wall Street Journal article that says exactly that by a captain of a ship, who pointed out that, I think, I'm not sure if we have this Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
If you pull that article up, there's well, it might not actually be in that one. It might be in that might be the condensed version. But there was a quote by a ship captain saying that this was totally absurd, the idea that we're going to go along with this, and that by being escorted by U.S. naval forces, we actually make ourselves into more of a target, which is true. Iran would have every incentive to blow up both the ship itself and any kind of military ship that was escorting it. Now, Trump made it very clear just a few hours later, or the Trump administration did rather, that there would be no escort, that they if you guys are on your own, you're welcome to take our advice about, our best guess as to where these mines might be, but we're not going to do any heavy lifting for you. Which is wise, Why would they risk their lives plunging headfirst through this incredibly dangerous strait? Much better to get some gullible moron to do it instead and, find out where the mines are that way.
It turns out that the Trump administration is not playing 13-dimensional chess, that they actually have no strategy and they're just managing the chaos they unleashed with this insane war, which they fought. Which they're fighting for Israel, as they've acknowledged on the White House website most recently. And that Iran is now claiming to have fired warning missiles at a U.S. destroyer and possibly even hit the U.S. destroyer, and CENTCOM is in full denial mode. This is Iran's footage of warning shots fired at U.S. destroyers, missiles, rockets, and drones. So, like, where could this possibly lead except more pointless conflict in which the U.S. will not achieve any military objectives and the Gulf states will continue to get hammered and the global economy will spiral into chaos? Project Freedom is something that Trump devised, he didn't devise it, authorized flying, just flying blind. I know who devised it. It was the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, which we should probably call the Foundation for the Destruction of Whatever's Left of Our Democracy. This Israeli front group in Washington that also devised Trump's naval blockade, which is destroying the global economy. and is supposed to be blockading the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, which has led us back into conflict because Trump was getting antsy, and Trump declared that Iran's terms were unacceptable because they're unacceptable to the Israelis who are controlling this entire situation. So I don't see how this leads anywhere but towards conflict. I've seen some warn this could lead to a Gulf of Tonkin-like false flag attack, but why would that even matter? Let's say the US says, oh, Iran hit our destroyer. Well, Iran would be happy to take credit for that. They're not afraid of further conflict. They're not trying to avoid it. They have the initiative, and they have the upper hand. They have the cards.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And Operation Freedom, emphasis on dumb, seems to point in exactly this direction. And as you pointed out, the strategy appears to be getting dictated from Tel Aviv. And this is something that multiple high-level Iranian officials have expressed to me, that
Yeah.
it's difficult to negotiate with the White House, given that they appear to be an Israeli proxy. That how can you separate between the American interest and the Israeli interest when the American interest seems to have so slavishly subverted itself to the Israeli interest, when you have people like Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff negotiating on behalf of whom? And no one seems to know whose interests do they represent. It's it's a very legitimate question, and from the Iranian perspective, there's very little to be gained by negotiating with these people. And as we can see by their actions over the past 12 hours, it seems preferable from their perspective to just continue with hostilities rather than engage in some kind of negotiating charade in which every time they try to negotiate in good faith, they're getting bitten in response. And so there's really nothing to be gained by doing so. The only thing from their perspective that's left is to speak in military terms.
Yeah. And since you brought up, the U.S. negotiating team, Steve Witkoff has just added Nick Stewart from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, which was founded to defend Israel's interests in Washington and is an Israeli intelligence cutout. So basically, he added an advisor to help him articulate what he already believes, which is what Israel wants. This is where I was going to go. I'm glad you brought that up, that you have had access to some pretty high level Iranian officials. You just interviewed Ibrahim Azizi. Actually, you had two engagements with Ibrahim Azizi, who is the head of the National Security Council in Iran's parliament. And you discussed Iran's view of the U.S. negotiating team and its posture in the Strait of Hormuz and a lot of other issues. We should have that up later today. We're editing it right now, but give us a preview of that interview and what Azizi told you, especially as with regards to the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, I just mentioned one point he made, which was that the proximity between the U.S. negotiating team and the Israeli government makes them extremely unreliable negotiating partners. He also noted that, and this has been expressed to me again multiple times, that every time Trump says something, or every time these negotiators say something, they will fly off to Washington, and then that will immediately be undone by a statement or a phrase by President Trump. So there's this kind of back and forth in which no one really seems to know who is calling the shots. No one really seems to know whether or not these negotiators actually speak on behalf of anyone other than themselves. Other interesting points that he noted, I asked him whether there are any circumstances in which Iran would be willing to allow the U.S. to return to its military bases in the Middle East, which have been almost entirely abandoned
Yeah.
under Iranian fire. And he said, with kind of a knowing smile, he said, "I don't think so." He was a very quick, by "I don't think so," I took that to mean absolutely not, but, dressed up a little bit more diplomatically. He was very quick with that answer and, pretty firm, which seems to indicate that Iran has basically evicted the U.S. from the Middle East. Which I think, as an American taxpayer, I am not exactly upset about. If that means, a couple dozen less bases that we have to subsidize in order to encircle some enemy of Israel, then that is really no sweat off my back personally. Um, what else did we discuss? I mean, it's a pretty fascinating interview. It's also a little unorthodox in the format. I was only able to get about a half an hour with him, and we had originally scheduled a meeting for after his meeting at 7 o'clock. I think the Iranians likely understood that in the next few days hostilities would probably spark up again, and so that meeting lasted until about midnight. And then finally I had a chance and got a knock at the hotel room door that said, "If you're still awake, now's the time. It's now or never." And so I jumped into action and filmed an interview in the back seat with this top Iranian official as he went from one side of Tehran to the other. And it's certainly one of the more interesting interviews I've ever filmed. I look forward to sharing that with our audience, and I'm sure you guys will enjoy watching it. He's very candid about his beliefs. Had quite a few jokes about our president, and really told us that he feels sorry for us to be led around by a man like Trump. I asked him to respond to several of the statements that have been circulating widely. One which I think we may have also in the document, when Trump basically confirmed the description by the Iranian foreign ministry spokesman, who said that the U.S. is acting like pirates. And then a few days later, Trump says, "Well, yeah, we're like pirates. It's very profitable." He said, word for word, "We're like pirates."
Here it is.
Yeah.
Was no response. Turn your ship around. Evacuate your engine room immediately. And you see all these guys running out of it. Now, they're 5 miles away, and one shot into the engine room, blew up the engine room. The ship stopped. They used tugboats, and then we landed on top of it. On top of everything else, we then land on top of it, and we took over the ship. We took over the cargo, took over the oil. It's a very profitable business. Who would have thought we were doing that? We're like pirates.
Ha 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 ha.
Very profitable.
But we're not playing games because, for 47 years, Iran has been pushing everybody around. They're the bully. And
Yeah, Iran. It's Iran.
They're
How
the
many
bully.
countries have they invaded over the last 47 years versus the U.S.? It's like, we're like pirates. We just stole all this oil, but they're pushing everybody around. My Trump impersonation sucks compared to my Obama.
Yeah. Maybe he'll run for a third term. Maybe they both will.
Well, it doesn't matter, and someone will inhabit their politics, and we're definitely
Democrat or Republican, it'll be the same. That's what can you remind me who was the Obama advisor who basically says that they approve of Trump's war with Iran and that there can never be any real negotiations with them?
the Israeli guy, Amos Hochstein, who
That's right.
fought for Israel, not the U.S. military, and was Obama's sort of Lebanon liaison envoy, said we supported what Trump was doing, but we just don't support the execution, which is the principal difference between the parties. So I think the Azizi interview is going to be really significant. We're working on editing it. It's technically difficult to edit, but I think it will be rewarding.
Yeah. He said
Um,
he felt sorry for us Americans that we're being led by someone like Trump. And
you get the leader you deserve.
yeah.
So let me ask you about two major war crimes where you went to the ground and went to the site of two of the worst U.S. war crimes in recent memory. One of them was just historically possibly the worst U.S. war crime, which was the bombing of the girls' school in Minab, Iran, in which close to 170 people were killed. 120 of them were schoolgirls. We won't have time to play the entire package, but you begin in a destroyed classroom. Here's your intro.
The morning of February 28th began like any other. They had come to the school here to learn and to play. And just like our children in America, they had names and faces and hopes and dreams. But all of that was shattered when at 10:30 a.m., the U.S. military launched a Tomahawk missile directly at them. The U.S. Department of War struck directly in the center of the building, killing dozens of children instantly. The teachers who survived tried desperately to usher the children to safety. With many still trapped inside, adults and kids alike ran back in to rescue their friends and siblings. Outside, parents began to arrive, and they started searching frantically for their children. That's when the U.S. military hit the school with a second Tomahawk missile. In all, 155 people were killed. 120 of them were children. Around me, you can see the results of American foreign policy firsthand. This is what our leaders and the Israeli leaders have decided to do to the children of Iran in order to teach them a lesson. It is an unconscionable act, and one which every thinking and caring person should endeavor to spend the rest of their life trying to prevent from ever happening again.
Well, obviously that experience made a big impact on you, as it would have on everyone. It's, every parent's worst nightmare. And hundreds of family members had to deal with the aftermath of this hideous crime. Two Tomahawk missiles striking a school. And you met some of those family members. Give us your impressions of that experience and what the family members of those murdered schoolgirls told you.
Yeah, it was probably it was one of the worst days of my life, just experiencing that vicariously through those poor parents who will never get to hold or hug or kiss their children ever again. Their children who will never get to grow up, who will never get to live lives, will never get to fall in love, will never get to have children of their own. It's it's one of the worst things I can imagine happening, and it didn't happen to just one family. It happened to over 100 families, and in some cases, families lost both of their children. There was a pair of siblings, Madi and Rehana, whose parents you can see in the footage. You see her mother throwing herself on the grave of Rihanna and then caressing it, their fingers showing the longing that she has for her child, who she will never get to see again. And then she gets up and she has to do the same with another gravestone right next to it. Her other child, also taken from her. I was told that Rihanna survived the initial blast and was outside the school and went back in because she said she had to find her brother, and neither one of them ever left. So that was, it's just beyond heartbreaking. It took my breath away when I heard that, and obviously I kind of broke down over and over again that day. It's just there's something so deeply, deeply wrong about the loss of a child and about parents having to go through that, and you never recover from that. There's no coming back from it. So to see that again enacted on not just one family but on over 100 was deeply, deeply distressing. And if you show the footage again right at the very beginning, in the first 10 seconds, there's an exterior shot of the school, and you can see the windows of the upper floor. You can see that they are charred black, that there is soot coming out from the windows, and that was all of the windows of the building have this sort of outline of black ash uh, extending out from. Uh, yeah, just let this roll for 2 or 3 more seconds, and I think we'll see it here. Uh, After this next shot of me, you can when there's this exterior shot of the building, um, right there. Oh well, yeah. I think we may have just yeah. You can see there's in this. It looks like smoke, but you can see the soot coming out from the windows, and this was clear on the back side of the building. But all of that soot that's around the windows on the upper floors just kind of gives you a insight into how powerful that blast was. It instantly incinerated many children. Um, it was a huge fireball that blasted throughout the building and then escaped through the windows, which was the only place that the heat and the energy had to leave. So many of those children were instantly burned alive. And then when the follow-up strike happened minutes later, that was uh, it was described because the media fixated on this, and the U.S. government kind of tried to claim that, oh, we saw that people were approaching this IRGC facility, and so we just assumed that they were terrorists, right? And it's a little bit like that infamous video where I think they target it was collateral damage, and they're targeting journalists in Iraq, and they kind of make the point that, oh, because people are sort of gathering, they must necessarily be terrorists together. That was the line of thinking, apparently. I suppose it's entirely possible that they had pre-programmed in some kind of strike package, and all these missiles were going to be sent one way or the other. But to me, it certainly seems like they deliberately targeted the people who gathered in order to send a message, basically, that we will kill anyone. We will kill whoever it is, because again, this attack happened within the opening salvo of the U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran. This was within hours of the sneak attacks, within hours of the execution, the assassination in broad daylight of the leader of Iran, Sayyid Ali Khamenei, and who, again, not just the leader of Iran, but the spiritual leader for all Shia Muslims. I think that's also worth noting that this wasn't just some mullah. This was a man widely beloved and respected by over 100 million Muslims, hundreds of millions of Muslims. Um, and then to follow it up almost immediately with the brazen massacre of over 100 school children. I believe it was 73 little boys and 47 little girls was the figure that they ultimately arrived at, and that was whose graves I walked among outside of Minab. All of this just to say, this is the war that we're fighting, right? It's not a World War II style liberation war. It's not freeing the Iranians from some oppressive regime. murdering little kids in order to strike fear into the heart of an entire society. It's believe Trump when he says an entire civilization will die tonight. It's it's a crime against humanity. It has all the matching components. Uh, the murder and extermination of an entire group of people, a systematic, widespread effort, according to the standard ICC definition that qualifies as a crime against humanity, not just a war crime. So I want people to understand what we're talking about when we discuss the Minab school massacre. Um, and I also want them to note that the US government still refuses to release its investigation into what happened. We know from people who have leaked information to the New York Times that it points to the US military being responsible, but they won't release it, presumably because it found that our government and our military carried out this horrible, horrible crime. And I also want people to note that as soon as it became clear that the US was responsible, that this story basically disappeared from the news. No one in the West is talking about Minab anymore. This horrible, horrible crime, which if Russia committed or the Iranian government itself committed, can you imagine? We would never hear the end of it. But since the US was responsible, it's presumed to be an accident, and it's basically covered up and not meant to be discussed in polite company. So everything about this is just unconscionable. And everyone involved in that strike should spend the rest of their life rotting in prison. Everyone involved in covering it up should be punished heavily as well. And everybody involved in the media manipulation in burying this story would also ideally, in a just world, would also be tried at The Hague as well.
Well, the U.S. regime has taken no responsibility for this. Their figureheads, such as Pete Hegseth, have made statements of intent to commit crimes against humanity. Trump has made statements of intent to commit genocide, such as his vow to destroy an entire civilization. Here's Pete Hegseth on March 19th after this strike. Whoa, sorry.
Will be the largest strike package yet, just like overwhelming force applied with precision. And again, today will be the largest strike package yet, just like yesterday was. As I've said from day one, our capabilities continue to build, Iran's continue to degrade. We're hunting and striking death and destruction from above.
Death and destruction from above. I mean, I know we don't punish anyone in the U.S. for actual war crimes because, I mean, and no one even speaks about these crimes from previous administrations because they're afraid they'll be tried for their own. I pointed out in my tribute to Michael Parenti, since he wrote To Kill a Nation, his most controversial work, which I called his bravest work on the calculated U.S. destruction of Yugoslavia, that there were many statements at that time by Wesley Clark that sounded, the Supreme NATO commander, that sounded exactly like Pete Hegseth's statements, but about Yugoslavia and attacking Serbia. Statements by Joe Biden on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that sounded exactly like Donald Trump. You know, I was suggesting we blow up bridges. I was suggesting we blow up power stations, taking credit for blowing up Serbian power stations and infrastructure. That's mostly what the U.S. did. And none of them went on trial, blowing up refugee convoys, dropping depleted uranium.
Another example of something that really, I think they kind of tried out in the destruction of Serbia was the attack on journalists, right? Attack on
bombing of Radio TV Serbia. 20 journalists were killed. It was a deliberate bombing, and Wesley Clark said this was a command and control station for the Serbian military. So
that's exactly what the Israelis say about the IRIB in
Yep.
Iran, and they blew up during the 12-day war last year in June 2025. They blew up the IRIB headquarters in Tehran, and then the wreckage, the husk of a building, was attacked by the Israelis again. This bombed out, non-existent building, they hit it again this year, just
Yep.
I guess just to send a message. But they hit it again on March 2nd, and then they claimed that it was an IRGC command structure. So they used the exact same blueprint as what they laid out in the destruction of Yugoslavia. And just really quickly before I move off of Minab, I forgot to mention that the U.S. had come. I mean, we've heard all these ridiculous excuses. First, we heard the narrative that was coming from Israeli bots and the Iranian Pahlavism monarchist bots and figureheads on social media. The first one was that this was the Iranian air defense malfunctioning.
Oh yeah,
which
yeah.
which
No, all the
was
monarchists were denying it. Just remember when Israel bombed the Al Ahli Baptist Hospital in northern Gaza, and the doctors delivered a press conference surrounded by the corpses that had been slaughtered on the grounds of this hospital, and instantly the Israelis released some grainy footage and claim it was a misfired Palestinian Islamic Jihad missile, because they're afraid the U.S. was going to shut down the war and impose a ceasefire. Same thing happened here with Minab. And all the monarchists were saying, well, it was an IRGC missile.
Well, and then when the video footage was produced and the fragments of the Tomahawk missiles were produced and shown on Iranian media, the narrative again shifted, and then it became, and this was what Trump himself vocalized, was that Iran possessed Tomahawk missiles and that they blew themselves up with these non-existent Tomahawk missiles.
Right. And so Matt Tardio attempted a OSINT analysis, a classic Tardio analysis, showing it was actually, a textbook Tomahawk missile that didn't resemble anything in Iran's stockpile of cruise missiles.
He went full Tardio, and that's to be expected. But I mean, the rest of these excuses were, and they're still running with this excuse that it was an IRGC base.
Yeah.
And this is what I was told by every local who I discussed this with, was that, okay, 20 years ago, that was the truth, but that this base was shut down 2 decades ago, and that 15 years ago, it reopened as civilian structures, and that there was a civilian, not IRGC related, this is the claim that's being produced to this day in mainstream media reports. There was a civilian clinic in that compound that was struck, and by the way, even if this had not been converted into a civilian structure 15 years ago when it reopened, the school was outside of it. The school is outside of this complex. It's not within the limits of the former and rehabilitated military infrastructure, which, as I could see, contained no military markings or identifiers of any sort, which made me believe these locals who had very little incentive to lie, and who were all horribly traumatized and not in any condition to coordinate some kind of massive deception campaign, even if they had been so inclined. So every step of the way, this has been pure deception on the part of U.S. leaders and media, and just every single lie adds insult to injury. And I think it's time for them to stop and just take a serious reckoning, take a look at the mirror at what they've done and who they are, and ask themselves seriously about, if they're religious, about where they want to spend the rest of eternity.
Well, Hegseth is a demon worshiper, and this is what the U.S. military does. I mean, you drew a connection to the My Lai massacre during the Vietnam War, but many forget that in 1991, the United States military bombed a civilian bomb shelter in Ahmadiyya, Iraq, and murdered over 400 people. So this may have actually been a worse massacre than Minab. But
it's hard to debate, but something about targeting an elementary school and killing mainly children makes it it's just for me personally. I guess we could debate, the horrors of American war crimes, but there's
a long trail of bloodshed here. What the U.S. military is not exactly liberating people. As Michael Parenti pointed out, the U.S. military has never intervened on behalf of a progressive or revolutionary movement. And it has this history of massacres that we can't forget. The George H.W. Bush Library has an entire war crimes denial page on the Ahmadiyya massacre. And I assume the Trump library won't even acknowledge Minab. That's kind of the difference. What did Bush say about the downing of the Iran Air 455?
I will never apologize for the United States of America.
I don't care what the facts are. I will never apologize for the United States of America. We need Randy Credico. Saddam Hussein is a very bad man. But I'm not in Bush mode. I can do his son much better. These people are evil. They have evil in their souls.
But you saw, right? We've picked apart this sort of war justification document that the Trump administration published, which is just a very slightly edited rehash of an FDD, of a Foundation for Defense of Democracy's web page. And it's all of these kind of tenuous connections to Iran. They include attacks by Hezbollah and by other people who they claim are Iranian proxies. Almost all of these deaths are American service members who were serving in overseas military adventures. Imagine for a second that Iran had assembled a document about the U.S. crimes against its people. It would not be limited to Iranian military. It would be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of civilians. It would be, as you noted, the casualties of Iran Air 290. It would be the little girls in Minab. It would be masses. It would be far more people, and very few of them would have any military connection at all. So, I know it's kind of ridiculous to talk about U.S. double standards at this point. I think the mask is fully off. Obviously, they don't give a shit. But just imagine for 1 second that Iran would take action on us. They would have far more legitimate of a casus belli to attack us and to do unspeakable things to us than we have ever had for them.
Yeah, I mean, we've been terrorizing them for 47 years. And then before that, Operation Ajax to remove Mohammad Mossadegh as Iran's elected prime minister. So elected president. Another point I wanted to make, though, is on the same day that the U.S. bombed the girls' school in Minab, it tested for the first time Lockheed Martin's new precision strike missile, a new cruise missile, and blew up a girls' volleyball practice in La Merde, Iran, killing 21 people. Most of them were girls practicing volleyball. So, where's the Iranian, did Iran attack itself there? Where was the military facility near that volleyball practice? I mean, they're not even able to explain what happened there. And this week, Jim Teichel, the CEO of Lockheed Martin, described the war on Iran and the broader conflict that Trump and Israel have ignited across the Middle East as a golden opportunity. That was during a shareholders meeting. So these are the demons behind this attack. And they are walking among us and claiming that Iran is the aggressor. Nobody's buying it, by the way. The US public is mostly not on board because they're being economically devastated. But there are some of us who are also disgusted with this war because it's been a civilian slaughter. And, you know, not to take this conversation too far, I mean, we spent a lot of time on it, but you also visited the site of another, I would say a war crime, but a very textbook kind of Israeli style war crime in which I think it was the Israelis wanted to assassinate an Iranian general. So they blew up an entire apartment building in Tabriz. This hasn't been much acknowledged in Western media, but in order for Israel to assassinate Ali Larijani, the Iranian speaker, which was also a disgusting crime against a civilian official, they bombed 5 apartment buildings because they weren't sure which one he was in at the time. And scores were slaughtered. So just quickly, I mean, what did you see there? You met people who were killed just because they were family members of a general or happened to be neighbors of the general.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, this was the strike which was carried out at midnight on the first night of Nowruz, which is the Iranian New Year. So they targeted this Iranian general's home, knowing full well that he would be home because everyone in Iran is home with their families. So the decision was made, you know, we're going to take this guy out and we're going to do so at a time when he is going to be at home for sure with his entire family. And so they took out this Iranian general and they killed his entire family with him, his entire immediate family. Every single one of them is gone now. And we interviewed in the aftermath some of his extended family members, and they were obviously shocked to their core. They expressed that they would never forgive or forget that this had been done to them. They do not want to negotiate with the United States or with Israel. They don't see them as humans, and they don't see them as capable of negotiating at all. They don't see them as capable of diplomacy. You have to be human. You have to be willing to negotiate in good faith. None of these things seem to be the case when it comes to the United States, and certainly not Israel.
This is from your report from Tabriz. Here are the family members. Completely invisible people in Western media. You see some members of the Iranian Red Crescent who have also been targeted specifically by Israel, but also the US. And the Red Crescent rescuers are being targeted in double and triple tap strikes all across Lebanon. And I remember a woman who you spoke to here at the site of this crime said, I cannot see why our government should not negotiate with people who freely slaughter children. And then she's holding up a photo of one of the children who was murdered in this strike. So that's something that's important to remember here, is it's not just this isolated school massacre. This was happening on a daily basis during the Ramadan war imposed on Iran for 39 days. Central Tehran was just being assaulted. These were all civilian sites. You've been to Central Tehran. I've been to Central Tehran. It's a very densely populated place. And they'd say, oh, there's a military target here, an official, IRGC official, and you're blowing up an entire apartment block. That's, Israeli-style genocidal tactics.
Yeah, I also we'll get this report up soon, I'm sure, but I also reported from the Gandhi Hospital, which
Oh, really?
was
I didn't
blown
know
up.
that.
which was blown up by the U.S. and Israeli forces because they were targeting an IRIB transmitter station next door. And so this massive hospital is just completely leveled. All the walls are gone on all of the floors. It's a large, tall building, and it's completely blown out. It's one of
I'm going to
the
show some of the CCTV footage from an Israeli hospital, a U.S. Israeli hospital attack in Iran while you talk.
well, it's the Gandhi Hospital is one of the main centers in Iran for fertility treatments. There's some 40,000 embryos that were being stored there, frozen there, that health authorities have had to desperately find stopgap measures to place them in other facilities across the country. 40,000 women on hold who cannot have children in the meantime because the US and Israel decided that an IRIB, which is to say Iran's
And you can
national
see here, sorry to
broadcaster
interrupt.
station, was
Sorry to
next
interrupt.
door.
Sorry to interrupt, but you can see here a nurse rescuing children in the IC in the in incubators. But
Yeah, that's powerful footage. I think she grabs children two at a time, and she is racing back and forth, trying to take them all to safety, as many as she can. These babies and children that the U.S. and Israel simply have no regard for their life. And that's just how they operate. That's standard operating procedure.
these people have been demonized so relentlessly. Iran as a country has been demonized so relentlessly in US media since 1979. And it's only thanks to social media that the US public is able to see this. And it's part of the reason why this war is so unpopular is it's disgusting. It just disgusts the average person who's capable of seeing this. And Western media has not shown this footage. They'll call it Iranian propaganda. Why are the Lego videos hitting so hard? It's because they contain the ring of truth. People relate to it. Iran has truth on its side because Iran is being targeted. Iran had this war imposed on them. So you also went to the site of another hideous U.S. war crime, which, you know, in light of so many crimes has been almost forgotten, and we'll be publishing footage of that. It's the attack on the B1 bridge, which was a major bridge under construction, which would have been the largest bridge, I guess, in West Asia, in the Middle East.
The tallest.
And this was in Kashan. And people were picnicking under the bridge at the time it was blown up. Oh, let's just blow up a bridge over people who are picnicking. Who cares? Trump has orders to destroy infrastructure. This is what it was, the horror. This was the horror.
Yeah.
Who does this other than the U.S. and Israel on this scale?
Yeah. And the second video is, I think that if you look at the next video, you can see, I think, 7 bunker buster bombs being dropped. If this one is the video I'm thinking of that repeats in slow motion. Yeah. Yeah. So you can count them. 1, 2, 3, 4. Not done yet. Here comes some more. 5, 6, 7, 10 bunker buster bombs dropped in a double tap strike on the B1 bridge on Nature Day. So that's why the 13th day of Nowruz is in Iran. It's considered Nature Day. It's a day when Iranians go out with their families, and as you saw, they put up tents. So they'll have in case it rains or they want to eat in kind of a little shelter. They have their little tent, and they go out into into nature, into beautiful areas. And the area surrounding this bridge is one of those places. I was told at least 2,000 people had come out to that specific area on that day in order to enjoy the great outdoors with their families. And they were greeted again with another series of massive, massive missile strikes by the US. And this bridge was a huge undertaking. Construction began 7 years ago, and it had a total cost of, I was told, 3 trillion toman, which it's difficult to calculate the exact price in US dollars because the price, the cost of the Iranian currency, the value of the Iranian currency has fluctuated so much over the course of 7 years, but it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a huge, huge undertaking. And I was told that at the time of its destruction, it was not yet completed. It still had about a meter gap in the middle, which is a fact that totally undermines the claim in Western media and by these governments that this was somehow a dual use bridge. It hadn't even been completed yet. How could it be serving military purposes?
Dual use. The military drove over the bridge, except nobody could drive over the bridge.
Except no one could drive over the bridge.
And let's
Yet they
not forget
spread
how
it
many
on both sides
universities
in
were
the middle.
bombed. So many universities were bombed by the US and Israel across Iran in order to destroy their knowledge base. And they would always say dual use, dual use.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
like,
I visited the Isfahan University of Technology, where, because it had an AI lab, it was deemed dual use and therefore a justifiable target. I mean, if you applied that standard to American universities, the entire Ivy League would be a target. If you applied that standard to the school in the town where I grew up in Blacksburg, Virginia, Virginia Tech, which has a massive drone program, which is next door to the Radford Army ammunition plant, which has plays a part in creating the accelerants for virtually all of these rockets that we're seeing dropped on these Iranian civilians. By that standard, my hometown would be wiped off from the map in a heartbeat, and no one would be able to complain about it. Obviously, that's not something I want to see. And for that reason, and for many, many more, I wish that our government would stop blowing up schools and universities.
dual use, Stanford, CIA feeder network, dual use, George Washington University across from the State Department, dual use, Harvard University, which has made Jake Sullivan, Genocide Jake, a Henry Kissinger fellow. We could also call all these schools douche use, probably because of the culture. But, you know, Americans would freak out if a foreign military was bombing their universities. And that's what's happening.
It would be unforgivable. And, you know, if somebody did Minab to us, can you imagine? We would spend the next
Nuclear
100
war.
years, nuclear year immediately, and the next 100 years wiping out any single person at the vaguest connection to it.
Yeah. Imagine if Iran bombed a synagogue in the US. Well, we bombed a synagogue in Iran. Nobody cares. Their Jews don't matter.
Yeah.
So we're going to look forward to those reports from you in the coming days.
Yeah.
We have, your report from the B1 Bridge, your report from Gandhi Hospital, your interview with Ibrahim Azizi. You had an incredible run, and we're hoping you'll be doing more reporting from the region. And special thanks to Kay Pritzker, our correspondent and sort of Swiss Army knife, for the collaborations with you on editing your footage so quickly and getting it out. These are really high quality reports. I'm jealous that I couldn't be there but I had prior commitments here, and I hope to get back out there. Unfortunately, it looks like we're heading into another round in which, as I said, the U.S. will not achieve any military objectives. It has no military objectives that it can possibly achieve. The U.S. just claimed to have taken out 6 IRGC fast boats. The IRGC denies this. It hasn't opened the Strait of Hormuz. Scott Bessent says the Strait of Hormuz is open, or that the U.S. controls it. It doesn't control it. They're just lying markets.
If Scott Bessent really believes this, then I look forward to seeing a video of him strapped to the front of an oil tanker making the trip himself.
No, you know what Scott Bessent is going to do is he looks like he's primed to bail out the UAE, which is getting hammered, which got hammered, and which now says is going to attack Iran. And it got hammered because it attacked Iran previously with drones and with jets. It was a participant in the last round of this war. And so we are going to bail out this corrupt, undemocratic, crooked monarchy for its own gambit to engage in the Epstein Accords, the Abraham Accords, and normalize with Israel and become the quasi-Arab Zionist regime that has been pushing for a U.S. ground invasion of Iran, that is such a stooge that it removed itself from OPEC so it could continue to get aid from Donald Trump. We're going to pay for that, the U.S. taxpayer, just as we paid to bail out Argentina so Javier Milei and his party could remain in power as they took a chainsaw to Argentina's public assets and its economy and are balkanizing the country on behalf of the U.S. and Israel. We are going to pay for all of that. It's not so, you're watching Wyatt's reports and feeling the justifiable hatred for our leadership that you should feel with every fiber of your being. We are not a republic. We're not being led by leaders of a republic. They're stopping us from having a republic. This is the essence of empire, that we are paying for them, for the Lockheed Martin CEO, Jim Teichel, to have a golden opportunity testing missiles to murder Iranian girls at volleyball practice. We are going to pay for a $1.5 trillion military budget that Donald Trump and Pete Kegsbreath have proposed. What is that money going to go to? It's not going to pay for U.S. soldiers abroad. It's not going to pay for veterans of U.S. wars who are homeless to have shelter or to have PTSD treatment or to get them Joe Rogan psychedelic drug gags to help them with their trauma. It's not even paying for that. It's just paying the rich of our country. It's paying the Trump family, who are now military contractors, teaming up with Israeli firms to contract with the Pentagon. That's the essence of empire, is our pockets are being raided. The treasury is being looted to pay the imperial leadership. And Trump has lifted the mask on that. So you should feel complete and total hatred and contempt for these vile figures. But Iranians understand that's not the American people. And that's why they're reaching out to us and asking us to do something to disrupt to disrupt the status quo in the US. That's what an activist named Guido Reichstager has just done at the Frederick Douglass Bridge, climbing this bridge across the Anacostia River to fly a black flag in protest of the U.S. war on Iran and the Israeli war on Lebanon and the rise of an AI Skynet regime across the U.S. is to just disrupt the status quo, which Western media, corporate media, is seeking to maintain. Code Pink is out there now to show support for him. He's about to come down from the bridge, but he's been up there for 3 days. And so if there's anything you can do, is just be disruptive about this war because it's about to start again. And I can't commend you enough, Wyatt, for what you did out there. You went in there not knowing whether the war is going to start again, whether you were putting your physical safety at risk. At the last minute, you brought in a flak vest and a helmet. And, what you did was what Western corporate media has failed to do. No one's stopping them from going in and showing these war crimes. But you went and did that. And that's what our mission is here at the Grayzone. And you all who have supported us, supported Wyatt to be out there. We're covering all his costs. So we will have more from Wyatt, from Iran, and from the field, wherever else you go in the region.
Yeah, just want to say I am honored and incredibly grateful to be able to be out here showing everybody what it's like on the other end of the sword. And I'll continue to do that as long as I'm able and as long as you guys at home keep supporting us. It's important to be able to show this firsthand. I think it's really one of our only weapons in this new war on the truth. So Thank you very much, Max. Thank you very much, everybody watching. And I will see you guys soon, I'm sure.
All right. Well, Wyatt, we'll definitely have you back to talk about this more. And we'll, again, be featuring your interview with Abraham Azizi today and further reports. All right. Take care of yourself out there. We'll be in touch.
Will do.
Peace.
Later, Max.
All right. Well, here is I mentioned Guido Reichstatter and his dramatic protest in Washington, D.C., climbing the Frederick Douglass Bridge. Here's some video of that before we bring in our next segment. He actually had to take his shoes off because he was sliding down the bridge. There he goes. This is footage by Ford Fisher, man on the scene pretty much everywhere. And he made it to the top and stayed there for 3 days to protest the war in Iran. As I mentioned, Code Pink is there now. And anyone in the Washington, D.C. area who can get to the Frederick Douglass Bridge now to show support. It's time to disrupt the status quo. They couldn't get him down. He's just coming down because he has to eat. And we have a good friend with us, Aaron Mate, to cover. We have a lot to cover. Aaron, how's it going?
How's it going? I just want to share the warm sentiments and appreciation to Wyatt for going to Iran, seeing what it's like on the other side of the guns, and issue a PSA. Like, I'm sure Wyatt's available for interview if any Western outlets, especially progressive outlets, want to interview him. Like, for some people, the Grayzone has cooties. Like, they treat media like a schoolyard. But maybe a guy who goes to Iran in the midst of a war, films from the scene, as we saw Isfahan, the downed plane, the school massacre in Minab, the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, this is important stuff. And so I hope Wyatt isn't interviewed just on the Grayzone, as great as that interview was. I hope more people will speak to him. It's and those who've gone before him, Dimitri and Ahmed who went, and Bushra Sheikh, if you know her, she's British. She's also gone to Iran.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people who've gone on the ground and collected testimony from people victimized by this bombing campaign. And so it's important to hear their voices. And so I'm grateful to Wyatt for what he did.
Yeah, we got the exclusive with Wyatt, but it wasn't hard to do. I don't think anyone else has been there haven't been other outlets that I know of reaching out to him, but they will, I'm sure. And he was in Iran, moving around a lot with very spotty Wi-Fi. So I actually waited till he was in Istanbul and would have reliable Wi-Fi. So yeah, Wyatt's available for interviews. I feel like I'm doing a bachelor auction for Wyatt. The Grayzone bachelor auction. We're gonna have like the Grayzone Chippendales calendar.
That would not be a bestseller. But yeah, but
We'll have like one.
Really moving, especially his dispatch from the Minab school. That was incredibly moving. And it's one thing to document these horrors from afar, but to go up close and to see it for yourself, I'm sure that was a very just a difficult experience. And so I'm really grateful for him for doing that.
Yeah. And I think we covered Project Freedom, Trump's harebrained scheme to escort tankers through the Strait of Hormuz, which seems to just be a trigger point for reigniting conflict. There's no way they're going to be able to open the Strait of Hormuz through this scheme, especially when they're not willing to openly declare that they are going to escort them directly, which would bring more fire on those ships. But I don't know if you have any take on Trump's announcement.
I just think Trump is trying to delay having to do anything. The idea of him making a deal with Iran, forget it. Like, this administration is not capable of diplomacy with Iran. You can see that in Trump's comments, how over the weekend, and you referenced this, that they haven't paid enough of a price for their 47 years of mayhem. Which, first of all, if anyone has a case against someone else for 47 years of mayhem, it's Iran against the U.S. for nearly 5 decades of terror, from supporting Saddam Hussein as he killed hundreds of thousands of people in Iran, to shooting down an Iranian passenger jet, to the murderous sanctions that have crippled Iran's economy. You can go, the dirty war in Syria, which is designed to bleed Iran. You can go on and on and on. But first of all, that's not a reason to go to war, just because you have grievances against a country going back 5 decades. And again, the U.S. doesn't even have a case there. But the idea of this administration staffed by people like Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, you mentioned earlier, Steve Witkoff just hired a staffer from the Israeli lobby group, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Forget it. A deal is not going to happen. So I think Trump is just stalling for time. He also doesn't have a military solution to the Strait of Hormuz. So I think what we're just looking at is just perpetual stalling and this frozen conflict, maybe some skirmishes here and there, but returning to major combat to liberate, quote unquote, the Strait of Hormuz, that's not going to happen either, because he can't. He's lost that battle. Yeah.
Which raises the question, can Iran enact a toll system that will pay for reconstruction as a means of compensating for sanctions and an endless blockade, which aims to starve Iran of assets in order to provoke some kind of Syria scenario and cause internal instability and desperation? Can they do that? I think that's the answer. That's Iran's way out of the sanctions regime. And in the near term, will Iran allow the U.S. to even rebuild its bases in the Gulf, which will a new CNN investigation tells us what we all already knew, which was that most of those bases have been totally destroyed. Again, this is empire. We paid for those bases. Those radar systems cost billions of dollars, and they've all been destroyed because Trump launched a crazy war for Israel, an imperial war for Israel. It's all wasted. All those assets are gone, and they should have never been there in the first place. They were just there to prop up undemocratic monarchies that are providing us with oil, which is also going to be wiped out through the destruction of LNG facilities and oil fields. Here's that CNN report. I'm going to take a 1-minute break. And, I think this is pretty illustrative of the massive defeat that that U.S. empire has just suffered. And it's coming from CNN.
Wait. American soldiers enjoying a karaoke night at one of the biggest U.S. military hubs in the Gulf. That was then. This is now. A once bustling American microcity in the desert, nearly empty and heavily damaged after a weeks-long barrage of Iranian missiles and drones. One of many U.S. military facilities in the oil-rich Arabian Peninsula, targeted by Iran even as the U.S. and Israel pummeled the Islamic Republic's large arsenal. So what impact have Iran's strikes had on America's footprint in the Middle East? A CNN investigation found evidence of unprecedented destruction. We can reveal that strikes damaged at least 16 U.S. installations across 8 countries. According to our analysis and sourcing, that's the majority of American military positions in the region, and some of them are virtually unusable now. A U.S. source familiar with the situation told us that they'd never seen anything like this at American bases, that these were rapid, targeted strikes using advanced technology. Iran's main targets? Multi-million-dollar aircraft, like this Boeing E-3 Sentry, which gave the U.S. a huge amount of visibility over the Gulf. It's out of production, and in today's money, it's worth nearly $500 million. Critical communications equipment. Look at these giant golf balls. They're known as radomes, and they protect satellite dishes vital for data transmission. In this base alone, Iran destroyed all but one of the radomes less than a month into the war.
So the golf balls are gone. The U.S. has been blinded in many ways. That's why the early warning systems are gone when Iranian ballistic missiles come in. This is a very methodical campaign by Iran. CNN acknowledges that Iran may have actually launched a Chinese satellite system, which means the U.S. faces an adversary for the first time that has very clear reconnaissance satellite photos of the targets it's attempting to hit. This is a document of defeat, U.S. defeat, and Iran is slowly beginning to proclaim victory. The next phase is to gain permanent control over the strait through a toll system, and then begin to sort of alter Western financial hegemonic control by paying for reconstruction through its own means, including charging ships in Chinese yuan, which would be, I think, like a final defeat, and make Iran a world power. That's a longer term scenario, and in the near term, as you mentioned, like Trump is just biding for time and doesn't actually have a clear strategy. Maybe he thinks he's going to pressure Iran here into making a worse deal, but there will be no deal.
Well, you compare what Iran hit, which is U.S. military bases, and yes, a couple of hotels where U.S. Officials put soldiers to stash them away and use the hotel workers and guests as human shields. So you compare what Iran hit, which is military targets, to what Trump hit, which is civilian targets. Maybe, yes, I'm sure, yes, he bragged about sinking the Iranian Navy and its Air Force, which wasn't much of an Air Force to begin with. But you look at the main target inside Iran, and it's industry, it's infrastructure, all those schools that you and Wyatt talked about, the U.S. blowing up under the fake claim that it's dual use. And even if it were dual use, of course, they wouldn't have the right to be hit by the U.S. because Iran wasn't a threat to the U.S. But, petrochemical plants, steel factories, bridges. I mean, the U.S. went after Iran's economy. Iran went after the U.S. military. And so the contrast is just so stark. Iran doesn't even have missiles that can hit the U.S.
Yeah.
Their missiles can hit U.S. military bases that surround it. But Iran can't even hit the U.S. So like the disparity between what the two countries targeted, it's just a completely different galaxy. And that's the Trump strategy. It's okay, regime change, that didn't work, but then let's just destroy what we can of this country's infrastructure. And if he resumes the kinetic phase again, that's exactly what he'll resume bombing, is Iran's civilian infrastructure, industries. I don't know how many Iranians lost their jobs as a result of Trump's war, but it's in the hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. And that's what he's counting on, is the country just being so impoverished that it can't fight back, and the people, turn on the government, which of course has not worked. If anything, we've seen the opposite effect.
I think that, you make a good point. Iran has not been killing masses of civilians in the Gulf states. The number is very low. It's been hitting bases. That's now clear. It's been hitting U.S. military targets. That could change, although they don't want to target the civilians, especially in a place like Bahrain, where the civilian population hates the leadership, the Al Khalifa dictatorship, and is on the verge, and seems at times on the verge of overthrowing it. This fake country, which was set up by the British, would be basically decolonization in real time. But if the U.S.-Israeli coalition resumes its attacks on Iranian infrastructure, Iran will attack desalination plants and retaliate in a totally justifiable tit-for-tat way by attacking oil infrastructure. And this will be the end of these Gulf dictatorships, because it will be extremely hot. People won't be able to have their air conditioning. The Dubai model, in which wealthy foreigners pay zero taxes, will be destroyed. Scores and scores of hotels in Dubai are already closing. You don't hear a lot about it because people are so afraid of telling the truth. And expats who want to go back there won't say anything on social media. Local Emiratis are terrified of talking about this. Bahrain has just declared a state of emergency. It's on the verge of collapse. And if the U.S. and Israel start these decapitation strikes again, assassinations of Iranian leadership, what could Iran do then? Assassinate the monarchs. Mohammed bin Zayed becomes a target. The Al Khalifa family becomes a target. Their defense ministries become targets. It's tit for tat. And it's not me saying this. It is a member of the Iranian negotiation delegation that was in Islamabad who's openly saying, this is what will happen next. This is the price. Well, this is in Farsi, so our Farsi speakers will understand. Farsi speakers. This is how Mohammed Morandi summarizes it. Iranian MP and member of the negotiation delegation, Mahmoud Nabavian, states that if Iranian leaders are assassinated in any attack, all of the complicit despots in the Persian Gulf will be killed and their palaces destroyed. So I think there's more that Iran can do here. And Trump doesn't seem to understand this. He also is avoiding democratic accountability in the US. After the Vietnam War, a new rule was imposed by Congress that the president, after 60 days of conflict, has to go back to Congress for authorization. And what Trump is saying is Project Freedom is just a humanitarian gesture. Those are his words, a humanitarian gesture, which means that the conflict has not restarted. He's using all kinds of deceptive language to avoid congressional authorization, to avoid basically abiding by the Constitution. It's a deeply undemocratic war that's being waged. Pete Hegseth said that after the ceasefire was signed, after 39 days, that put the war on pause.
Yes.
No, the U.S. is still at war. So they're violating the Constitution. They're violating a longstanding congressional rule in order to restart a conflict, which they claim has not begun again. It's just a gigantic lie.
I've never seen someone make this argument before, that because the war's been on pause, and then therefore the war began more than 60 days ago, then that means like the clock resets and they don't have to go seek congressional authorization. It's a novel argument. Whoever came up with it deserves a creative writing award, not a legal one, but that's what they're going with. But Trump has to deal with gas prices now at a 4-year high. You have more Republican lawmakers who are hearing from their constituents that this is not good. They're worried about their reelection. Trump has to listen to them as much as he tries to make everything about himself. He has to at least pay attention to the fact that, members of his own caucus are now saying that this is threatening their reelection. So he's in a bind, but he doesn't have any answers because he's not willing to say to him that he lost, that he failed, and he's not willing to defy Israel yet, but at least not publicly. So he's just stalling for time and coming up with new fake claims of this new operation to free the Strait, even though he's not even going to try to actually send in ships to fight Iran. So he's in a bind, and so now we're just in a waiting game to see how long he can stall for time for.
And these were such revealing comments by Trump about his priorities and how lost he is, how politically lost he is. I love the background here. Golden years.
Look at this.
Hold on.
It's nonsense. Look at this. I'm talking about all these things you're getting, and you stand up when I talk about you can't let Iran have a nuclear weapon. We can't. But I did something that was, I don't know, foolish, brave, but it was smart. I would do it again, but I thought the numbers would be much worse. I thought
it was foolish, brave, could have been smart. I mean, whoever says I did something that was foolish and just launched this war, it shows how careless he is. Now listen to what he says next.
the stock market would go down much more. I thought the oil prices would go up much more. I said, but we have no choice. Whether it does or doesn't, I have to do what's right. It's nonsense. Look at this.
So oil prices, when he said that, were at the highest level since COVID. We're like $108 a barrel. The inflation rates are surging. Stock market was another stock wipeout. And he's saying that he thought it would actually be worse, but he would have done it anyway, and that he did it just because it was the right thing to do. But he never made the case to the American public before February 28th about why he had to attack Iran. The entire decision was made in a Situation Room meeting where Netanyahu sat at the head of the table and Trump sat to the side, and Netanyahu and his Mossad director dictated to Trump, and Trump followed their orders to stage a surprise decapitation attack. And now he's saying, well, he thought it would actually be worse than it already is. That shows just how demented he is. And, his own base is getting hammered. I think the key here is fertilizer costs are surging. So much fertilizer passes through the Strait of Hormuz, and the costs are surging so much that, farmers in Asia, Africa, Europe are going to be hit extremely hard, and some of them won't even have fertilizer. But in the US, this is eating into Trump's base in the heartland, the agricultural producer base that sent Trump back to office.
My family's farmed for 100 years. You don't want to be the one that can't keep it going,
I am a Republican. I voted for this administration, but my patience is running thin.
We're here in the heart of the Mississippi Delta to talk with farmers about how the war with Iran is impacting them.
Oh, it's been awful.
The closure of the Strait of Hormuz is causing prices to skyrocket, things like diesel fuel and fertilizer.
We're buying a little bit at a time, and sometimes we know that we've only got 2 weeks of fuel. So what has happened to us is not just the impact of 1 year. We have lost customers forever. They will never come back because we're deemed an unreliable supplier.
I'm paying 60% more for diesel fuel than I would have been paying 45 days ago.
You got to have diesel for everything. You got diesel to disc, to plant, to harvest. So diesel steadily going up like this, man, it affects us bad.
You have no choice. You've got to go ahead and buy it, no matter what the price is.
So they can't afford diesel. They can't afford fertilizer. They're completely screwed. And then we all pay the price in food prices at a time when inflation is surging. But Trump thought it would actually be worse.
I have the answer for these farmers. Let's just bring in the Israelis who made the desert bloom, right? Right. Israel, like before Israel came into Palestine, it was all just desert. And then all the ingenious Israelis, this is like the Israeli myth goes, just made the desert bloom. So to compensate for, these farmers who just can't get by because they don't know how to, work the land like the Israelis do. Let's just bring in the Israelis, because after all, this whole war is for them. So the Israelis surely have the answer to the woes that they've caused for American farmers.
Yeah. What did the Israelis do? Oh, yeah. They took over all of the orange groves in Jaffa and kicked the Palestinians out and made it bloom. Exactly. That worked out well.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, that indigenous teaching is not really transferable to the U.S. because there's no more land to colonize here. So I don't know. The Israelis have to come up with some other idea to fix the woes that they caused, the mess that they caused. But it's just, yeah. Trump has to be getting this message, despite the, like insular shell he has around him. Some of this has to be sneaking through, and he's got no answers whatsoever. Absolutely none.
I mean, I actually think he believes his own bullshit. If you judge from his late night AI slop binges, he really believes that he has all the cards. This is I feel like this is something like a late night, like Jimmy Kimmel could do this. Like, we don't need to do this at the Grayzone, but it's gotten to the point where there's pretty much nothing else to say about Trump. He is a late night liberal blue anon punchline. Like, blue MAGA turns out to be kind of right. The turbo lib boomers are basically right.
Yep.
Except about the part that negotiating with Russia is wrong.
Well, and they were even right that he's a foreign asset doing a foreign power thing. They just doing the bidding of their oligarchs. Again, it's just the wrong passport. It's Israeli, not Russian.
Yeah, Rachel Maddow said he's waging war for Qatar or something. We can't talk about what's staring us in the face.
Yeah.
Donald Trump doesn't even know how Uno works. If you are holding 6 wild cards in Uno, you're losing. What an idiot. So, you're not supposed to have all the cards in Uno. Again, that could be like a Jimmy Kimmel joke. It's not like doing, mocking Trump at this point. It's like too easy, but it really highlights the mentality that is animating this war and extending the conflict. This is what Donald Trump has been up to while Anya just texted me and asked when I've ever played Uno. High school was junior high were boring.
Yeah, it's been a long time for me. But
this is Trump. This is at the Doral golf course.
Oh my
God. A $20 million gold statue of himself pumping a fist.
Oh my God.
I mean,
that's hideous.
He's focused on this while the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies is devising his war plans. He's going on late night AI binges that are so bizarre. And here's one of his paid influencers. This guy's one of the most pathetic MAGA bootlicker influencers, Eric Daughtry. Trump posted this image of himself chilling in the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. Marco and JD are there too. Liberals can't stand seeing this. No, like any rational person who lives in the United States would reel in horror that this is what the president is doing. And Donald Trump has many pools on his property. When have you ever seen Donald Trump with his shirt off in a single photo in a pool?
It's really
never. You will never see Donald Trump with his shirt off in a pool. Is that Nancy Mace, by the way?
I have no idea. It's really amazing the contrast.
Burgum.
It's really amazing the contrast between Trump's first term and his second term. Like, Trump had it so good in his first term. His opposition was obsessed with their conspiracy theories. He's controlled by Putin.
Yeah.
They were like a walking caricature every single day. And of course, he won as a result. I mean, Democrats just wasted his entire first term. In his second term, though, I mean, Trump is the tables have turned, and now he's the caricature. He's the buffoon that they all said he was in his first term. But the one thing that's keeping him somewhat afloat, or not the one thing, but one thing that helps him is Democrats still haven't seized the moment. Like, they could be organizing big rallies around the rising costs because of the war in Iran. But even we saw recently with the No Kings rallies, there was like still some hesitancy to really call out the war and to connect, as that video we just saw from More Perfect Union did, the high cost of war to, the fact that Trump is hurting farmers and his own base. There's still some reluctance to do that. And that speaks to the broader sort of demobilization that's happened since the Obama era, when Obama won on a surge of anti-war sentiment and then shut all that down. And Democrats haven't gone back to that ever since, when right now would be a golden opportunity.
That's why No Kings attracts primarily gray-haired boomers, the turbo-lib boomers who obsess over all of the kind of neocon-oriented conspiracies like Russiagate and are still sort of detoxifying themselves from that era and can't quite get out of it, even though they would naturally oppose this war. The whole concept of No Kings to me was to kind of water down the more progressive and anti-war instinct of the grassroots base of the old Democratic Party, the grassroots base that marched against the Iraq War of George W. Bush, which really weakened George W. Bush and drove his approval ratings into the low 20s. That's all gone. And No Kings, it just prevents any coherent anti-war protests from taking place. Then anti-war groups and progressive groups have to enter into this giant mass of every Democrat-oriented issue and march alongside people with Trump-Russia signs in order to get their message out there. And it doesn't really break through. No Kings is run by Democratic operatives who are sponsored by who else? Soros and Open Societies. And, they're not exactly anti-war veterans. So you have Guido Reichstager climbing the Frederick Douglass Bridge and staging this dramatic protest, but the Democrats aren't exactly sending their base out to support him.
Oh,
They're afraid of that,
Yeah, 100%.
especially Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, Apac Shakur.
Yeah.
Chuck Schumer. We talked about Amos Hochstein, the Biden envoy to Lebanon, declaring on, was it Fareed Zakaria or Christiane Amanpour? I can't remember which, that, he would have supported attacking Iran. The problem is in the execution. That's always the Democrats' problem.
Yeah, he said if Biden had a second term, they would have done Midnight Hammer, the strike that they did last June. He said that they were even talking about that in the Biden administration. Let me show you this too. This is Richard Nephew. Now, Max, you've written about him. He wrote that book called The Art of Sanctions, which you dubbed The Art of Sadism, because Richard Nephew, an architect of the sanctions on Iran during the Obama era, he bragged about raising the price of food for ordinary Iranians during a holiday season, and just what a success he thought that was. Here he is. Now, and then he served under Biden again, and he helps explain why under Biden there was no return to the JCPOA, even though members of the Biden administration negotiated the JCPOA under Obama. But you have a wing, people like Richard Nephew, Amos Hochstein, they were the dominant ones under Biden, and so therefore there was no return to the deal. So anyway, here Richard Nephew, writing recently in Foreign Affairs, he admits that basically U.S. sanctions, which he helped design on Iran, are the cause of all of Iran's problems. This is what he says. And he says, comprehensive sanctions relief for Iran would help flood the country with enough money to overcome its legacy of mismanagement, corruption, and failed governance. In doing so, it might relieve popular pressure on the regime. So he's admitting that all the problems that we, blame on Iran, its corruption, mismanagement, and so forth, that if the U.S. sanctions were lifted, all those problems will go away. So he's acknowledging the U.S. sanctions are the main cause of Iran's problems. But that's why he opposes lifting those sanctions, because it would relieve popular pressure on the regime. So the answer then is to keep putting pressure on the people by denying them the right to have an economy. Because if we relieve that pressure, then they won't pursue regime change according to our dictates. So that's Richard Nephew, and that's another reason why it's so difficult to have a change of policies, because Trump's policies have a strong bipartisan base of support.
Yeah, that's why I call it the U.S. regime. The Democrats under Biden, the Democratic foreign policy establishment, opposed a deal with Iran, and opposes then because they oppose sanctions relief. Any deal would require sanctions relief. Iran never got sanctions relief in any meaningful way from the JCPOA. And it's because of the mentality of people like Richard Nephew, who can never accept an independent, sovereign state in the middle of Eurasia. These are figures who are trained to dictate to other countries, to terrorize their people in order to impose US total hegemony on the globe, moving all the way towards a pivot with Asia that will eventually break China. And they're living in a fantasy world at this point. So I think Iran finally recognizes, and they had to learn the hard way, that the US only understands force. This US regime, not the American people, the US regime has very little popular support.
And by the way, the one guy under Biden who like favored diplomacy with Iran and restoring the JCPOA was Rob Malley. And what happened to him? What happened to him? Under
prosecuted. Biden approved of his prosecution.
He got basically framed by someone else in the Biden administration, and I have some guesses as to who, for leaking classified information to Iran, which is total BS. And so he was taken off of his job, and he got basically put on leave, pending investigation. So the one guy who like tried to do his job of diplomacy with Iran, his own colleagues in the Biden administration sabotaged him with a fake classified documents case.
Who do you think set him up?
I have some guesses, but it wouldn't be basically it's people like Richard Nephew and Amos Hochstein.
Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan.
Tony Blinken, who went to high school with Rob Malley, and they used to debate back in the day. Because,
really?
Oh yeah. They went to high school in Paris together. Well, and Blinken was a lifelong Zionist, and so they used to debate the Israel-Palestine issue when they were kids, and so they brought that feud into the Biden administration, and of course, Anthony Blinken won that round resoundingly.
I love that we have had a Frenchman as our Secretary of State, who's been replaced by a Gusano.
Yes.
Who doesn't even like go to the negotiations. He goes to UFC fights instead, because the negotiations are like such a sham. So Trump has no strategy. He's playing 3 dementia chess. He's focused on turning the reflecting pool on the National Mall into a casino style, Mar-a-Lago style blue pool, American flag blue. He's literally dyeing the reflecting pool. This is like, when you heard about like Saddam Hussein's palaces, his giant palaces, this dictator went mad, making his palaces gold while the people starved. And that's why we have to bomb them. This is what Trump is up to. It's not going to reflect. Blue doesn't reflect well. It's, a darker, more natural tinge of water reflects better. This is going to cost $20 million. The taxpayers, the US taxpayers, are paying for this. This is what he's focused on. And the people who are running his policy on Iran, the expert class, are people like Karim Sajjadpour. This is
speaking of water.
Speaking of water. And what they have done is they've successfully convinced Trump that after Iran has forcefully repelled and hit back hard against the full weight of the US and Israeli militaries seeking to impose regime change and destroy its nuclear stockpile, that Iran is weak and vulnerable. It's weaker than ever. Karim Sajjadpour is like the main Beltway expert, native informant, and quiet as kept. He's very close to the monarchist lobby. He appears at events of Nufti, which is the de facto think tank of Reza Pahlavi, which is calling for a U.S.-Israeli takeover of Iran, a breakup of Iran, the full theft and sell-off of Iran's public assets and oil and mineral wealth to Western investors. It's called for a Mossad purge of Iranian politics after the takeover. He speaks at their events all the time, but he hides behind this Carnegie Endowment fellowship where he was like working alongside Matt Duss for a while. And he testifies before Congress constantly. He's the main Iranian American voice on all of the Sunday shows. Fareed Zakaria loves him. He's always on NPR. He has basically a column at the Atlantic, and he finally, exposed himself as the dolphin guy in order to convince Trump that Iran was so weak that Trump could go in for another round. Here he is with CNN's Caitlin Collins.
Have them go dark and still deliver that oil to China. I mean, there's a physical blockade. They literally cannot do that right now.
This is a physical blockade. They're not able to send their oil and the resources to China, and a vast majority of their oil exports were going via sea. To give you a sign of the desperate measures they're contemplating, the Wall Street Journal reported today that they're contemplating measures like suicide dolphins, dolphins equipped with mines to try to go after U.S. ships. So that's not a measure which projects real strength.
Wait, I'm sorry. How would that even work?
So this has been discussed in the past by the Iranian regime.
You can't tell if she thinks he's the clown or she thinks Iranians are crazy. But I think she actually doesn't, is starting to see that this guy's like a sleazy used car salesman who should probably have a Bluetooth earpiece in his ear while he speaks and a few gold chains.
That
they want to strap bombs to dolphins.
To dolphins with mines to go after U.S. ships. Now, that's a pretty crazy asymmetric tool, but this is some of the measures that are being reported right now.
I mean, do you think that they could actually try? If they actually tried that, what would that say about their desperation?
Well, this is something that they've thrown out in the past to show the various options they have at their disposal. But again, this is not a show of a country which is strong. You don't contemplate those kinds of measures when you're strong.
What a fraud. What a complete and total fraud. Iran has just devastated most U.S. bases in the region. And he wants us to believe that they're going to resort to suicide dolphins because they're so desperate. I'm so sick of this guy being taken seriously. He's actually a CNN global affairs analyst. He's on CNN's payroll, it appears.
And early on in Trump's bombing campaign against Iran, he said that this is a rare case where the majority of the population supports the bombing. He went on CNN to assert on behalf of Iranians that they want to be bombed by Trump because he supports this regime change campaign. And now that it hasn't worked out, he has to basically be a suicide dolphin and embarrass himself so much by resorting to such desperate claims such as this. So in this context, he's the suicide dolphin. He's desperate for anything that can prop up the narrative. So that's what he's resorting to, is suicide dolphins.
Kareem Sajjadpour will be forever known as the dolphin guy. That just because, most people aren't going to remember his name. He's the dolphin guy. And he's citing the Wall Street Journal, which, which is run, their Middle East bureau has been run by a bunch of Zionist frauds as well. This is the Wall Street Journal bureau chief who cooked up the suicide dolphin story of Benoit Faucon. Iran is grasping for a solution to an American blockade it can't break. And the first line is that Iranian officials say Tehran could use previously unused weapons to attack U.S. warships, from submarines to mine-carrying dolphins. Well, we're seeing them hit some tankers today. And, Flipper was not harmed in any of those incidents. But here's previous Benoit Faucon hits from Venezuelan gangs and how Venezuelan gangs and African jihadists are flooding Europe with cocaine. Okay. I guess we got to blow up some Venezuelans on boats, right? Yeah, that was right around the time Trump started doing that. Iran helped plot the October 7th attack on Israel over several weeks. The IRGC gave the final go-ahead last Monday in Beirut. Completely bogus story. Iran was caught off guard.
This story was unbelievable because it asserted that there was this meeting of all these high-level people. I'm pretty sure it said that Nasrallah was there.
Yeah.
All the basically heads of all the bad guys, according to the Zionist way of looking at the world, were all there in Beirut and had a meeting before October 7th. It was just such a complete scam. And of course, the person responsible for these stories just got hired by who else but Barry Weiss at CBS News.
Well, she was the deputy, the deputy to Benoit Falcon. But the point is that the bureau chief clearly was trying to guide the U.S. to war with Iran, and as Israel wanted after October 7th, with this utterly bogus story, and has sort of succeeded, and now is pushing that Iran is weak and Iran doesn't have any answer to Trump's blockade. Trump, you keep doing it. I mean, that's been the message of the Israel lobby and the monarchist lobby, which are basically one thing: is, Trump is smart, Trump is being strong here, stay the course. You haven't lost this war. There's more to achieve, because they just want to see Iran get hurt more economically, even though there's no clear objective or strategy, and the United States and global economy are hurting. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I don't know if you want to, I wasn't planning on covering that, but it is significant. There was another purge at CBS News under the watch of Barry Weiss.
Yeah, well, they fired a longtime editor in London who was said to be arguing for balanced coverage of the genocide in Gaza. And so Barry Weiss ousted her and then appointed someone named Shandy Rice, who is based in where else but Israel, who was a deputy foreign editor at the Wall Street Journal and responsible for their Middle East bureau, and was, involved in stories like the one that claimed that UNRWA, the UN refugee agency for Gaza, had a bunch of staffers involved in October 7th. Also the story claiming that Hamas had a headquarters under Al-Shifa Hospital. All this was done under the tenure of Shandy Rice, whatever her name is. And of course, that makes her qualified for a top job at Barry Weiss's CBS News.
So here's Barry Weiss announcing Weiss announces Rice. Incredible news out of CBS this morning. Shandy joins us as foreign editor. Shandy has it all. She's a scoop hound reporter, a brilliant editor, and a clear-eyed leader. She's also curious, dogged, exacting, and tireless. More here on, from Paramount, which is owned by David Ellison, who is an Israeli asset, whose father, Larry Ellison, is a close friend of Netanyahu, and they basically bought Paramount in order to control CBS and gave Barry Weiss $150 million so she could drag CBS's ratings into the toilet in order to make it a Zionist propaganda mechanism and bring people on like Shandy Rice, who, as you mentioned, was responsible for one of the most scandalous stories of the post-October 7th era. I wrote about just a quick thread about her on Twitter, that she presided over Wall Street Journal's discredited report falsely claiming that 12% of UNRWA, United Nations employees, participated in the October 7th attack. The whole point of this story was to defund and destroy UNRWA, which was maintaining the refugee population of Gaza, providing them with free schooling and food and shelter. The fake story was co-authored by Carrie Keller-Lynn, who was not only a former reporter for the Times of Israel, she worked for the IDF in their spokesman's office. She was a spokesperson for the IDF. That was the co-author of this story under the watch of Shandy. It helped justify Israel's banning of UNRWA, bombing of its facilities, and ultimately set the stage for its replacement by the murderous Israeli and Trump-run Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which spread famine across Gaza.
Yeah.
So that story has a body count, but there's more. I mean, she's named in media reporting at the time by Semaphore, but there's more background on Shandy. I mean, why was she appointed by Barry Weiss? Her husband is Dov Weiss. He's a Jewish theology professor, I think, at the University of Illinois. Dov Weiss's father is one of the most prominent rabbis in the country, Avi Weiss. He's a columnist for the Times of Israel. He hates Mamdani, of course. Whatever. David Sheen reminded me, and he's done incredible reporting on the whole Kahanist movement, that Avi Weiss was an outspoken supporter of the terrorist Jewish underground, which carried out bombings and assassinations of West Bank mayors throughout the 1980s, mayors who supported Palestinian autonomy, the mayor of Bethlehem, the mayor of Ramallah, they maimed and killed people. And he openly not only spoke out for them, but raised money for them. So that says it all about what's going on at CBS. And this lady is not just Shandy Rice. She's not just going to be like the London bureau chief. She's taking over an entire division. This is a new position.
It's like Barry Weiss is running her own version of The Apprentice, Donald Trump's reality TV show. But the only criteria for being eliminated is if you don't serve Israel. So, you know, someone gets eliminated from her reality show because they don't serve Israel, and they get replaced by someone who does. And like, how far is this going to go when the Ellisons end up owning everything, like every media outlet except for, I don't know, the Grayzone and a few others? Like, they're going to run out of Zionists to hire from other outlets. So they're going to start like recruiting from like Zionist summer camps and Jewish day schools. Like, they're going to be hiring like freshman kids to be like bureau chiefs, because eventually they're going to run out of people to have doing these jobs. It's just and by the way, also going after UNRWA, the other major reason to destroy it, on top of the fact that it keeps Palestinians in Gaza alive, is that the fact that it's a refugee agency explicitly, it reminds the world that the people of Gaza, for the most part, are refugees, and that refugees have rights, and that they come from somewhere, a place that they were kicked out of by Israel. And so it reminds people that Israel is a colonizer, and that the refugees have rights. And so therefore, the agency that keeps refugees alive has to be destroyed and turned into now this thing, an issue not of refugees and having the right to return, having the right to compensation, but just to sort of like being people, oh, like they're displaced, so let's go send them off to Africa or wherever else like we can place them. So it was a deliberate evil, the pinnacle of evil, and the Wall Street Journal took part in it, and so did the Biden administration as well. The Biden administration laid the groundwork for this. And it's another part of their legacy. They participated, like Antony Blinken immediately suspended UNRWA's funding after the Wall Street Journal.
After that article.
Yeah, and everyone else followed suit. Canada, all these NATO states, it was coordinated. This was a deliberate campaign, and that can never be forgotten.
So you have an editor overseeing that piece who's married to the son of a rabbi who raised money for Jewish terrorists in the settlements. You have a co-author of the piece who was an IDF spokesperson, and the only sourcing in the piece comes from Israeli intelligence. The whole thing was an Israeli intelligence hoax to defund UNRWA, which succeeded through Tony Blinken, who was the stepson of an Israel lobbyist and the grandson of an Israel lobbyist. It led to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and famine, 1,000 people being shot seeking food at these fake aid sites, which itself then was spun out into the Board of Peace, which is led by Jared Kushner, whose family supported Israel, who knew Netanyahu as a young boy when he would stay at his house. The entire agenda is an Israeli intelligence agenda. And that raises questions. Is Shandy Rice an Israeli intelligence asset who was just hired by CBS News? Because CBS News is owned by an Israeli asset, David Ellison. I mean, that's what we're dealing with here. Then you had what's his name? They're Zionist version of Dan Rather or Peter Jennings. I forget his name.
The self-circumcised guy?
Yeah, the guy who had like a circumcision at age 40.
Yeah.
In order to prove himself, like so that he could be, get in the anchor chair.
Yeah.
What's his name?
Tony
DeCouple.
Yeah.
He's like the least watched anchor on TV. His presence has led to a record drop in CBS ratings.
Shocking.
Yeah. But he married an Israeli woman and then had to remove his foreskin in order to get into the anchor chair. That's literally what's going on at CBS News.
Well, his generals are a great metaphor for what's happening to the news industry and basically everything. Everything is being cut off, circumcised. for the sake
neutered.
Neutered for the sake of Israel.
That's well, you still got the gray zone. I haven't sold out to any Israel first billionaires yet, even though we destroy the free press in YouTube subscribers, YouTube views. And, we're not even pushing it that hard. We're heavily suppressed. But the part of the rationale for Barry Weiss getting all that money was she rapidly racked up like 300,000 subscribers. Like, wow, look at any of their videos. They sit there for weeks and get 2,000 views. Nobody wants to watch that. Like,
no one wants to watch Conversations with Coleman or
Coleman Hughes, aka Minivan Jones, hosting a debate between Alan Dershowitz and Josh Hammer on gun control. That would everybody. It's like the Iran war. Everyone can see that it's an evil war that serves no American interest. And everyone can see that the free press is fake propaganda and that CBS is just like, it just doesn't work anymore. And I think the British public can see what's being done to them as well. Whether they're on the right or on the left, they can see that they are subjects of some kind of regime that is doing away with whatever's left of what they had of a democracy, of a social democracy. And you can now go to jail for saying naughty things like, I support Palestine action, or globalize the Intifada. And I don't even want to call it the Israel lobby. It's Israel using the Zionist movement in the UK as a battering ram, and all British Jews, regardless of what they think, as human shields, is demanding more, demanding total criminalization of Palestine solidarity activity following the stabbing of 2 Jews and a Muslim man who doesn't exist in British media because it complicates the narrative, in the Jewish majority neighborhood of Golders Green in London. Keir Starmer has responded by calling to basically crack down on Palestine solidarity activity because he has been told to. And this really shows you where we are going in the United States. Luckily, we have a constitution with a First Amendment, but where they would like to take us, they being the foundation for the destruction of democracy. Here's Keir Starmer.
Anti-Semitism is an old hatred.
It's an old, he has to say it's an old hatred so that we don't look at it as a response to recent genocides carried out under the flag of the so-called self-proclaimed Jewish state. It's just some old thing that's just there, and people just get mad for no reason because they don't like Jews because we're like so funny and smart.
It's like, it's like he wants people to think, oh, like I think I'm mad about like seeing another massacre of children, but really, I wonder if I'm falling victim to some old form of hatred. Let me interrogate that and hold my criticism of the Jewish state. Let me put that outrage at shredded massacre children on pause as I interrogate my own inner hatred from centuries ago. That's the point of this.
Yeah. Am I like actually Torquemada? Am I like some Spanish inquisitor when I get mad about the Gaza genocide? Maybe. Torquemada. Torquemada. Remember Mel Brooks' History of the World? It's that level of farce. All right, here we go. Keir Starmer, the least popular British prime minister since anyone can remember, like the most hated man in the UK, the most discredited figure, is still at it.
That the roots are deep. And if you turn away, it grows back. Yet far too many people in this country diminish it.
He's attacking Brits. He's attacking British citizens who are mad about genocide and mad about being criminalized for their words.
They either don't see it or they don't want to see it. Take the marches that happen regularly across Britain.
The marches.
Of course, we protect freedom of speech and peaceful protest in this country. But if you are marching with people wearing pictures of paragliders without calling it out, you are venerating the murder of Jews. If you stand alongside people who say globalize the intifada, you are calling for terrorism against Jews. And people who use that phrase should be prosecuted.
Oh my God. Man, do not go to the UK. That is just horrible.
Well,
I mean, he's demonizing so many British citizens there who are just decent people who are sick of the slaughter of children and calling for them to be prosecuted. And he's catering to a foreign country, a foreign lobby, after we're supposed to look at as this ideologically guided terror attack, which was nothing of the sort. The marches. The attacker was not involved in the marches. He was a mentally ill man who tried to stab his own Muslim roommate before he carried out these attacks. And the Metropolitan Police are saying pretty much the same thing that Keir Starmer is. They're reading from the same script that was handed to them by the same elements.
2 men, one in his 70s and one in their 30s, were treated at the scene for stab wounds, and they're now taken to hospital. The 45-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and remains in custody following a checkup at the local hospital. He has a history of serious violence and mental health issues.
So they admit that the attacker actually stabbed a police officer before, and has tried to attacked several other people in the past, going back to 2008, and was registered with the PREVENT program, which is this counter-terrorism, counter-radicalization program put in place by the British state, which clearly didn't work.
And that investigation continues. Let me say a few words about what this was. Let me be clear. This is an attack on one community. An attack on one community is an attack on all London's communities. This was an attack on Londoners. It is an attack on British Jews. Too many Jewish people in this country feel they have to make choices that no other Briton ever has to make. They have to make choices about how they dress, where they go, or how visibly they live their lives. That's completely unacceptable and has gone on for far too long. We also need to be honest about the nature of the threat. Anti-Semitism is fueled by hateful and extremist ideologies. It comes from hostile states, the extreme right, and the extreme left. These are terrorist and hateful belief systems, but they're all rooted in racism.
So the left and the right are terrorists, racists, and this attack was guided by foreign states like Iran. However, it was carried out by a mentally ill man with a history of violence, and it was targeting one community, but that's not even true. They're lying. A Muslim man was stabbed by the same person that same day. Is that a different community? So everything that's being said here is a bogus script, and you can see the Shomrim behind to the left of this Metro police official. The Shomrim are a Jewish paramilitary force run under the watch of the CST and other supposed community organizations, which was basically gifted 25 million pounds after this attack. The Metro police are reading from a politicized script.
I wonder how this will play out at the trial, if there is one. Are they going to bring in some expert to argue about the guy's motives? And when it comes to his stabbing of the Muslim man, he'll say mental illness. And then when it's the two Jews, that was anti-Semitism. Like, how does that fly? It's so incoherent. There was another incident recently, right, with the burning of the ambulances in London.
Yeah. And also in Golders Green.
also which looked like a false flag. I think that's fair to say. So it's like they're dying for any excuse to justify suppressing a further suppression of free speech in the UK if that free speech criticizes Israel.
Well, it really raises some serious questions that I think go beyond just the political machinations of Keir Starmer or the Metro Police as they seek to crack down on Palestine solidarity protests. The ambulance attack was not treated as a terrorist attack, and the assailants were let out on bail. All right, you don't let assailants out on bail if they are terrorists. And there was another attack soon after on Iran International, which is an Israeli-controlled network that aims to destabilize Iran. It's a satellite network. Most people watching this know what it is. It has its offices in London. It's being maintained by Israel. So you would think that would be a target for Iran. Like, the IRGC would want to target that network. And an Israeli consular facility, I think it was the Israeli embassy, supposedly came under attack, but it was a very suspicious attack where nothing was damaged. Those who've been arrested in each attack tend to be teenagers. Those who attacked Iran International were not Iranian immigrants to the UK. They were like English, with English names, like white boys. Why would some like 18-year-old English kid who has no politics attack Iran International? And I think it was the same with the culprits of the attack on the Israeli embassy. They're being paid in crypto by a certain foreign entity. Let me read I'm pulling up another clip here because this really raises questions about what's going on. First of all of this is being blamed, including the stabbing attacks of 2 Jews and 1 Muslim man who doesn't exist, on a group called Harakat Ashab al-Yamin al-Islamiyya, which is said to be an Iranian IRGC-linked group, but actually only consists of a Telegram channel. Wyatt did a really good takedown of this fraud for us at the Grayzone. It's basically a Telegram channel. The language in the manifesto of Ashab al-Yamin recognizes Israel as a legitimate state, which is something like no Iranian or resistance axis group would do. Things are spelled wrong in its communique, and it claims responsibility for anything that happens here. It claimed responsibility for the Golders Green ambulance attack. It claimed responsibility for a break-in of a car in a Jewish neighborhood in, I think, Antwerp, which the car actually belonged to a Moroccan Muslim woman. So anytime anything happens in a Jewish area, this Telegram channel claims credit in order to blame Iran. It's pretty obvious that this channel is run by Israeli intelligence and that they're seeking to get the media to blame Iran, which it proceeds to do, like the Telegraph blamed Iran for the stabbings. They follow their orders. But look at the last line here. It's referring to an arson in Hendon, and it says the group has claimed 6 attacks since early April, including arsons at Jewish community ambulances, a synagogue, and a Persian language media outlet. That's Iran International. Analysts note its branding mirrors that of pro-Iranian militias. No, those are like pro-Israel analysts. Though some members may be, quote, criminals for hire, recruited online and paid in cryptocurrency. That sounds familiar. Where else was that taking place? Which other Five Eyes Commonwealth country was that taking place in? It was in Australia, the Australia of PM Anthony Albanese, immediately after Albanese announced his intention to recognize a Palestinian state. These attacks began happening on Jewish targets. The first attack was an arson outside a synagogue, which happened to be a non-Zionist synagogue. Very interesting, with the congregation that was defying Israel. And who was carrying out the attacks? Criminal class, non-political elements, paid in cryptocurrency, offered cryptocurrency through Telegram channels, paid from abroad. Albanese actually came out and declared that these are, he called them paid actors. And all of it was being blamed on Iran. What was the consequence of these attacks? Paid in cryptocurrency from abroad to criminal elements. And, some homeless people were paid crypto to carry out certain attacks. People who have no ideology. The Iranian ambassador was kicked out of Australia. And then Isaac Herzog, the Israeli president, comes to Australia to meet with Albanese, inspires large protests in Melbourne, and he's gearing up Australia to support Israel, the coming war on Iran. And he holds a secret meeting with the head of ASIO, the Australian State Security Intelligence Organization. Something that has never happened before. Very strange. And the outcome, and in that meeting, he was pushing for more action against Iran. So the point is, we're seeing the same dynamic in the UK as in Australia. The same outcome, more pressure on these states to join the war against Iran, which they're currently involved in at a low intensity level. And only one country is served by this. Only one country is served by it. It's Israel. It is not Iran. And this is not part of Iran's playbook. So it's important to look at the big picture and go back to the point I made earlier in my conversation with Wyatt, which is that Israel and the Zionist movement has a long history of attacking Jews in order to achieve its malign objectives, going back to the bombing of the Patriotic in 1940, a history which everyone should learn. So let's raise these questions. Let's not be afraid to raise these questions about who benefits from this, because it's certainly not the British public and it's not Iran.
No, and especially when, after the Bondi Beach shooting that you mentioned, Netanyahu openly blamed the Australian Prime Minister, Albanese. He said, like, this is your fault for fueling the fire of anti-Semitism because as you mentioned, Max, because you supported a Palestinian state. So Israel didn't hide the fact that it was willing to exploit these attacks for its own cynical ends. And so given its long history of fueling attacks like this, it's totally fair to raise the questions that you're raising.
Yeah. So with that, I actually have to do a hard stop. I guess we covered a lot, and I got something else wrong on the schedule. I wanted to cover the OPCW whistleblower who you've been advocating for winning their case against the OPCW, but everyone should read about that at your Substack, Aaron Mate Substack. Thank you all for joining us for a live stream, one of our live streams, which haven't been frequent enough. We'll try to make them more frequent. Subscribe, like, and support us in any way you see fit. You're supporting on the ground journalism like Wyatt's, and we will see you all soon. Thanks for being with us, Aaron. Peace, everybody.
Peace.